Hello everyone! Welcome to another episode of Bible Q&A. Today we're discussing, why does God ignore me? It's one thing to not get your prayers answered, but it's another thing to not get back a reply at all. Several people in the Bible just didn't hear back from God, and today we're going to find out why. For example, in 1 Samuel chapter 14 verse 37, Saul asked if he would be successful in attacking the Philistines, but God didn't respond. So, he decided to play an ancient game of chance to find out the reason for the silence, and eventually, Jonathan ended up being picked. As it turned out, Jonathan had eaten a little honey to give him strength for the upcoming battle, even though Saul cursed anyone who ate before the battle was over. He was ready to put Jonathan to death for breaking the oath, even though he wasn't even there when it was being made. To be honest, I don't really understand the end of the story. Somehow, the people managed to reverse the curse, and everyone just went home right after without going to war? But that's not important. The lesson here is that God didn't say anything until Saul figured out what went wrong. The same thing would happen in 1 Samuel chapter 28 verse 6. God didn't tell Saul whether he would win the upcoming battle against the Philistines, so he wanted to find out why. The problem was, this time he did something illegal. He hired a witch to get advice from the late prophet Samuel, even though witchcraft was banned in Exodus chapter 22 verse 18, and Saul himself had banished most of the witches earlier on in his reign. Saul did eventually get his answer, but it wasn't the one he was hoping for. Saul wouldn't win the war, and David, his enemy, would eventually take over the kingdom. Often, this kind of thing happens because God doesn't care about what you're asking about to begin with. As it was said in James, ye ask and receive not, because ye ask amiss, that ye may consume it upon your lusts. James chapter 4 verse 3. Saul wanted to find out how he could defeat the Philistines, but Jehovah didn't plan for him to defeat them in the first place, so he didn't bother answering his question. Now, sometimes God does eventually answer, but far later on. For example, the reason why the Israelite nobles were exiled was because they failed to take care of the common people. As it was said in Zechariah, oppress not the widow, nor the fatherless, the stranger, nor the poor, and let none of you imagine evil against his brother in your heart. Zechariah chapter 7 verse 10. Since they didn't listen to his plea, he wouldn't listen to theirs, according to verse 13, although they didn't realize that until they were already in Babylon. In a completely different situation, in Luke chapter 1, Zacharias and Elizabeth had probably asked God for years for a child, and wondered why Elizabeth was barren. In the end, in verses 13 to 14, they discovered that it was because Jehovah was saving John the Baptist for them. If they ended up raising the greatest prophet of all time, according to Matthew chapter 11 verse 11, then maybe the wait was worth it. Finally, when Christ asked, my God, why hast thou forsaken me?" in Matthew chapter 27 verse 46, he didn't get a response at first. He asked to be saved from the passion in Luke chapter 22 verse 42, but he again was ignored. However, 3 days later, he received his reply. He hadn't been forsaken. He just needed to face the passion in order to obtain the kingdom. As it was said in Hebrews, but we see Jesus, who was made a little lower than the angels for the suffering of death, crowned with glory and honor, that he by the grace of God should taste death for every man. Hebrews chapter 2 verse 9. Of course, he already knew all this, but there's no harm in asking anyway, is there? Therefore, it's clear that there aren't any unanswered questions with God. Either you'll get your answer eventually, or he has an answer but just isn't giving one to you. In fact, with how big the universe is, and how much bigger God is than that, it's a miracle that so many questions get answered to begin with. As it was said in Psalms, when I consider thy heavens, the work of thy fingers, the moon and the stars, which thou hast ordained, what is man that thou art mindful of him, and the son of man that thou visitest him? Psalms chapter 8 verses 3 to 4. And that is where I'm going to stop with this Bible Q&A. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to like and subscribe.